Hi, everyone.
Greetings. We're in Genesis 49, Jacob's deathbed, often called blessings to his sons. Well, it turns out some of them are blessings and some of them aren't.
But at least it's telling them their future, really, their history.
Yeah. So we can
To
safely
come.
say these are Jacob's deathbed predictions about his offspring and their tendencies and therefore their future.
Pronouncements. Yeah.
And we've already dealt with the first four sons, all of whom were born to the other wife
Leah.
of Jacob, which was Leah. That was Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. And so we're at verse 13 now. Zebulun shall dwell at the shore of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall be at Sidon. That sounds like a blessing. Issachar is a strong donkey crouching between the sheepfolds. He saw that a resting place was good and that the land was pleasant. So he bowed his shoulder to bear and became a servant at forced labor. Well, that seems like blessing, then curse.
Mm-hmm.
Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a viper by the path that bites the horse's heels so that his rider falls backward. I wait for your salvation, O Yahweh. And that sounds mostly like a curse.
Yeah.
Then we have in verse 19, raiders shall raid Gad, but he shall raid at their heels. That sounds mostly blessing. Asher's food shall be rich, and he shall yield royal delicacies. Again, sounds mostly like a blessing.
Naphtali is a deer let loose. He uses beautiful words.
Mine says bears beautiful fawns. Quite a different thought. That apparently the Hebrew can yield both.
Joseph is a fruitful bough by a well. His branches run over the wall. The archers have bitterly grieved him, shot at him and hated him. But his bow remained in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. By the good of your Father who will help you, and by the Almighty who will bless you, with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lies beneath, blessings of the breasts and of the womb. The blessings of your Father have excelled the blessings of my ancestors, up to the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him who was separate from his brothers.
Okay, just pause there. Just the size of that.
Yeah, a lot.
Joseph gets more space than all the other, 6 we've already read?
Mm-hmm.
But that only leaves Benjamin, right? And what does it say about Benjamin?
Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil.
Wow. So Joseph's space, and it's all about physical blessings.
Mm-hmm.
So then you realize in the future of Israel, there's going to be great prosperity for the tribes derived from Joseph, which would be Manasseh and Ephraim. Mm-hmm. Ephraim actually is so prosperous that it becomes the name for the northern kingdom. Mm-hmm. So you have Ephraim and Judah, Ephraim being the dominant tribe of the north of the 10 tribes that break away. And then you realize, well, all of these tribes contribute to that apostasy. The only one that does not become apostate is Judah, and down with him is Benjamin. Yeah. But Benjamin's future here is, looks he's totally negative.
And when you think about Benjamin was the other favored child, the spoiled one.
Yeah.
And it did seem to spoil him. He seemed to think of himself as above law. So we see that in that later story about Benjamin. They almost get wiped out, right?
Yeah, Judges, near the end of Judges, we all remember that horrific story of how the tribe of Benjamin is almost completely destroyed, annihilated by the other tribes.
And it was because they weren't willing to give up some bad of their own tribe. So they seemed to think they were above the law,
Above
the conduct of that's expected.
above the law of Moses.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So whatever it was that generated that, they're fierce. That word jumps out at you, doesn't it? They're fierce, ravenous.
So
And then you realize the militance of some of the members of that tribe. Saul is of the tribe of Benjamin. He's a great general. Paul in the New Testament is of the tribe of Benjamin and proud of it.
Yeah.
And he's certainly the fiercest of the apostles.
So there was one more verse that we were supposed to read. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father spoke to them. And he blessed them, and he blessed each one according to his own blessing.
The ESV says there, the blessing each was the blessing suitable to him. In other words, wrapped up with his character.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the physical prosperity on Joseph, we know the end of this story. It turns out prosperity was not good for the northern tribes, especially the most prosperous, Ephraim, and becomes the seat of an apostasy that never is healed. They're never reconciled with their brothers.
Yeah.
And then you have Dan. Very brief. It just says, shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a viper by the path that bites the horse's heels, so that his rider falls backward. Most of this seems negative, and if you read the later history of Dan, Dan is also in that apostasy. In fact, his city, named after him apparently, becomes the center of that apostasy. Dan and Bethel are the two places where the apostates aggregate. And Dan is a fierce figure and a dangerous figure in the book of Judges too.
Yeah.
Samson comes from that tribe, and we know how lawless he was.
Yeah.
So what's this got to do with the future? Well, Edersheim and other writers just suggest that that's the reason Dan becomes associated with the Antichrist later. There's evidence for that even in the book of Revelation, that of the 12 tribes that are listed in Revelation chapter 7, he's missing completely. So the Jewish tradition is that Dan will give birth to the Antichrist ultimately. Then there's this for Jehovah's Witnesses, though, that we should notice, and I don't notice it noticed by the scholars on Genesis for some reason. This is the only place where the name Jehovah actually occurs in the Egypt narrative. This is the only time Jacob uses it in all of these chapters where he's blessing his children. It's the only time it's used by anybody. Joseph doesn't use it at all. Why does it occur here right after the blessing on Dan? I wait for your salvation, O Yahweh. Again, linked, is that linked to the final vindication of Yahweh's name when the Antichrist is dealt with by the intervention of Christ himself, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2?
And maybe it's because, I'm just thinking out loud here, but maybe it's because he's talking to his children. There's no Egyptian audience here. He's talking to his children.
So the use of the name.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't explain why it's only here, because he's referencing God continually, as Joseph is.
Yeah.
But why is the covenant name only used here? So we can only suggest, like Edersheim does, that it's got something to do with that final situation that develops on earth when Israel, according to the Psalms, will again be able to say, blessed is he who comes in the name of Yahweh. They can't say that now. They've been unable to say that really even since the first exile.
Yeah.
The name of Jehovah, Yahweh, has completely disappeared from the mouths of Jews. For the reverent reason, not for superstitious reason, for reverent reason that they don't feel worthy to pronounce it. But they will. The Psalms and the prophets agree on this. They will feel
when
that
when
they
they're
can pronounce it
in favor again.
When the covenant is renewed, yes.
Yeah.
And what are our links?
Well, we were going to do some reading of commentaries. So
Well, let's not neglect that.
deal with some of the ones that we didn't talk about.
Here's Strahan on Issachar specifically. Issachar's portrait is drawn with a few plain masterly strokes. He was a husbandman, strong, easygoing, indolent. In his rich inland valleys he led a life of placid content. He saw a resting place that it was good, and the land that it was pleasant. He entered into possession and had his heart's desire. He was pricked by no higher ambition. He should have been as strenuous as he was strong, but with wealth and comfort apparently secure, he did not see why he should exert himself overmuch. He loved the ignoble ease which has been called the vice of rich lowlands all the world over. In one trenchant phrase he is described as a strong ass. He was well aware of his strength, but did not know that he was an ass. In the end, he paid the price of indolence. As he was stretching his lazy length between the sheepfolds, he forgot that his goods needed guarding. The lassitude which disinclined him for labor equally incapacitated him for self-defense. And when strangers cast their covetous eyes upon his fat acres and swooped down upon his peaceful homesteads, he and his possessions became an easy prey to the spoiler. And then, as he would not toil for himself when he was his own master, he must even toil for another master, bowing his shoulder to bear and becoming a servant under taskwork. So Issachar becomes a warning rather than an example. He points the moral that the prosperity or careless ease of fools shall destroy them. That's a quote from Proverbs 1:32. And that's from James Strahan's book, Hebrew Ideals in Genesis, a book we recommend.
And I'm reading from Paradise to Prison, which is John J. Davis on Genesis.
If you want the titles of these books, by the way, we always put them in the description.
Okay, so he talks about Benjamin, and he says, "There is little doubt that Jacob compared Benjamin to the wolf because of the tribe's warlike character. History confirms this description. At one point, this tribe stood against all the others in defense of its wickedness in Gibeah. The Benjamites, I guess it is, distinguished themselves as archers and slingers. The judge Ehud, King Saul, and Jonathan were Benjamites. I keep liking to add to that. Benjamites. So was the Apostle Paul, which probably indicates that tribal identities survived into the New Testament period. This is important because some maintain that certain tribes were lost and that they migrated to Western Europe and North America. There is abundant evidence to the contrary."
That's a good point, because one whole cult was born of this theory, and that is the Worldwide Church of God, Herbert W. Armstrong, etc., which was a rival cult for many years to the Watchtower back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, etc., till they had scandal and dissolved and broke up. But the British Israel theory wasn't born by them. There are many people, even in the Orthodox churches, who held to that idea that somehow Britain's prosperity was connected to this prophecy about Joseph and Ephraim. What are our links?
Let's see. Our links is A House of Cards, Daniel 11 and 12, and the Genesis playlist.
Yeah, why did we pick that one? Well, because Genesis, or rather Daniel chapter 11 and 12, where the House of Cards is a bunch of geographical details about the coming of the one who is thought to be the source of Paul's doctrine of the Antichrist, or the man of lawlessness, in 2 Thessalonians 2. So the seedbed of that is Daniel chapter 11 and 12, where you have the king of the north and the willful king. Most people think it's the same king, but some think willful king is the Antichrist, and the king of the north is another guy. But look at the Watchtower's way of dealing with this. So this video deals with that House of Cards, and how you pluck out one geographical detail and the whole thing collapses.
Okay.
See you next time.